It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks to the museum's leadership for organizing this. Thanks to Catherine Clinton. Thanks to all of you for coming, including old friends I see in the audience. The South looms large in my life. I was born and raised in Tennessee. My high school is still my hometown high school is still the Rebels, and the Confederate flag is used quite a lot at football games, or at least it was when I was younger. Now I'm looking at something very different than this in many ways. I live in Texas now, which I'm not sure really is the South. I'm not really sure what Texas is, right? But so again, the South looms large in my life. Today I want to show you how complicated dealing with the past in Germany has been. There's even a fancy German word for this. It's called Vergangenheitsbewältigung, which means literally fighting with the past, trying to figure out how to memorialize the murder of 6 million innocent civilians in the middle of the 20th century. And this has been incredibly complicated and contested, and this process is quite complex. And so I want to lay this out for you to give you a sense of what this has looked like in Germany and sort of where we are today. The first time I went to a concentration camp was when I was living in Berlin. And my mother in Tennessee wanted to make sure that her son was doing okay in Germany, a good Southern mother, right? So she got a passport and came to Berlin. And she was there for about 2 weeks, and yeah. But she wanted to go to a camp, right? And there's a famous one just outside of Berlin in a really wealthy neighborhood, and so we went out there. And it was in the winter, and it was freezing cold. It was the middle of the week, and there was no one there basically except us. And we wandered around, and there was ice hanging from the trees, and there were crows flying around. And I think about this for a living, and I have a good wall against that, but it got to me. Just being there, being at the site, I wanted to go home and take a shower. It was literally chilling. And we were walking back to the subway, going back to my apartment. My mother looked at me, and she knows as much about the Holocaust as the average American. And she looked at me and she said, "How could people be so mean?" Right? And I think about that a lot, especially in this context. How could people be so mean? And how do we remember that, right? And this is a major question in Germany. We have to start with some political history here. All of the memorialization in Germany was shaped inherently by the Cold War. The Cold War began in Germany right after the war. By 1949, there were 2 German nations. All right, of course, there's Western Germany, also known as the Federal Republic. This is the capitalist US allied state. On the eastern side, there's East Germany, the German Democratic Republic, or the GDR, which is the Soviet communist satellite state. This division very much shapes memory of the Holocaust for 40 years, until the collapse of the GDR in 1990. What happens then is West Germany annexes East Germany, and everything is the Federal Republic, right, like it is today. We don't know really how many camps the Nazis set up. We think there are about 15,000 of them. Right? There are 3 different kinds of camps, and people forget this. There are concentration camps, and that's what I'm going to begin talking about today. Concentration camps are exactly what the name is. It's to concentrate enemies of the German government. These are not places that are designed to kill you necessarily, but people will die there. They're terrible, terrible prisons. Then there are labor camps where people are gradually worked to death. And that's what the majority of that 15,000 is. And most of those camps are small, scattered across Europe. Auschwitz is a death camp. And there are 6 total death camps out of the 15,000. So keep that division in mind. Do you know where the death camps are? You don't put a death camp in Germany. You hide them, right? Auschwitz, the other 5 camps are over in eastern Poland, hidden hidden from view. You can't have this in Munich, right? And so the majority of the victims of the Holocaust don't die in Germany, right? And so that's an issue in some ways, right? The first concentration camp the Germans set up was just outside of Munich in a little town called Dachau. Right? It was set up in March 1933, 2 months after Hitler came to power. It was designed to concentrate enemies of the Reich. Right? And this has become one of the most visited sites in Germany today. And I just want to lay out sort of what the memorialization of this place has looked like. It was famously liberated by the Americans at the end of April 1945. We don't know really how many people died there, but at least 30,000. Dachau housed Germans, right? And so this is a place that created German victims, right? Many of them were Jews, of course. The Americans famously liberated this place at the end of April 1945. They got within a few miles of Dachau and they smelled rotting flesh. There were about 30 train cars full of bodies in various states of decomposition that the Americans came to first. Then they got to the camp. This is a filthy place. There are bodies stacked everywhere when the Americans show up. There's a gas chamber here, but from what we can tell, the Germans didn't really use the gas chamber there. This is different than Auschwitz. All right, 1.3 million people are gassed at Auschwitz, right? So this is a different level. After the war, there's this terrible irony in this story. After the war, if you're a Jew who survived the Holocaust, the safest place for you to go, because of the American troop presence, there, occupied Germany. So hundreds of thousands of Jews who've survived the Holocaust try to flee to Germany, right? And so many of these camps become refugee centers for Jews and other victims. Right. Dachau opens as a memorial in the 60s, in 1965. The group in charge of creating the memorial, it was called, I have the name here, the Trustees for the Monument of Atonement at the Concentration Camp Dachau. Most of the survivors here are German Christians. And so from the beginning, this place becomes a site of contestation. That's what it looks like today. And if you go, there are 4 different memorials. Right? There's one for Jews, one for Catholics, one for Protestants, right? And one, this one's new, this is from 1995, for Russian Orthodox prisoners of war who were killed. This is a contested site. The Christian memorials were established not to mourn the loss of Jews, but to atone for the Nazi crimes against humanity, which might be surprising. Another thing I think that's noteworthy here is that if you go today, this is a place that is very sort of stereotypically orderly in the German sense. They're nicely kept gravel sidewalks, everything is clean, there are very convenient little signs that tell you what each of the places are, right? It's very, very clean and orderly, which is exactly the opposite of what this place actually was. Right? And I think that we can read this as part of the Federal Republic of Germany trying to distance itself from its past. Right? Another famous camp in Germany, one of the most visited, again, this is a concentration camp, is Buchenwald. And I think this is interesting for us because Buchenwald happens to be, and so, before I move on, Dachau has become this major site of tourism in Germany. All right? You can get postcards, right? It's become an icon of the Holocaust, frankly. Right? But that's in large part because it was made famous, in particular because of the American liberation. Right? And it just so happens that it's very easy to get to Munich from the airport to here. Right? And so Dachau is not Auschwitz. Right? It's a very different circumstance in a lot of ways, right? But it's become this sort of symbol of the Holocaust. Buchenwald. Dachau is here. Buchenwald is up there, outside of a town called Weimar. It is in the eastern part of Germany, this German Democratic Republic during the Cold War. The German Democratic Republic's founding myth from 1949 on was during the Third Reich, we Germans over here, we were all quietly good socialists and communists. All the Nazis, they came from over here, the capitalist part of Germany. We were taken over by them. We were all quietly good communists all along. Then the Soviets showed up in 1945 and helped us reach our dream of a state. Right? This is problematic at best. Right? And so Buchenwald opens in 1958. This is the memorial, this is the main statue at Buchenwald. This is a communist uprising of communist prisoners in the camp. And the official narrative at Buchenwald through 1990 was that German communists rose up and liberated the camp. That is not true. The Americans showed up in 1945 and liberated the camp. But that was not the narrative at all. Buchenwald was liberated by good German communists. Buchenwald becomes an important part of the GDR's culture. It's on stamps. Here it says, April 1945, the self-liberation of the concentration camp Buchenwald. The Americans liberated the camp. There, if you were in the East German army, you got your stripes here, for example. Important government meetings would happen here, planning the communist future. Right? This is a site of communist uprising against fascism. Right? I have, let's see, I'll give you a quote here. The official mission of Buchenwald at this point was to inform future generations of the immortal glory of our struggle against tyranny and for freedom, peace, and human dignity. Do you notice anything strange about that? At least 10,000 Jews were murdered here by Germans. That's not mentioned. Right? Politics. Moreover, that statement seems to forget the millions of Germans who followed Adolf Hitler. 37% of Germans voted for Adolf Hitler. They've somehow left our story here, right? These are all good communists over here. The GDR fell in 1989 into 1990. The Berlin Wall fell. Since German reunification, the site has been redone. Jews have been added into the narrative here, but it's also interesting to me that added into the narrative as well is that right after World War II, Buchenwald became a Soviet-run prisoner of war camp through which 130,000 Germans were held or processed. And about 50,000 of those Germans died, some of them Nazis. And so this is written into the narrative now. What does all this mean? It means that Buchenwald is now a place where Germans, Jews and non-Jews, are victimized by both Nazis and the communists. Right? This is an incredibly complicated story. Another stamp from the GDR about the freeing of fascism. We threw off the Nazis back in 1945. Now we're good communists. Also wanted to show you this. This is a memorial built in the German city of Hamburg. It was started in 1986. The city government of Hamburg in the 80s decided they wanted to build a memorial to the Holocaust. And so there were a lot of entries, and this is the one that was chosen. It was titled a Gegendenkmal, a counter monument. And the German artist who came up with this, the Hamburg government wanted the memorial to be sort of in the middle of the city in this big park, this beautiful park. And the artist said, no, we want this in a working class neighborhood in front of a strip mall in which people go and buy their groceries at the grocery store. Right? And so the city agreed. This is the beginning of an important theme, I think, in memorialization in Germany. The word in German is Alltag, which means every day. These artists wanted the Holocaust worked into the everyday of German life. As you're going to the grocery store, right, you will see this, or you'll see what I'm about to show you, right? And you'll remember, right? You don't have to go out of your way. You don't have to go to one of these camps. You can't help but be reminded, right? Which I think is an interesting concept. So, over the next 7 years, this column exists in Hamburg. And you could go up here, and there was a steel stylus, like a big pen. And what this monument was about was signing your name. And very, very gradually, over that time period, this monument is lowered into the ground. It disappears. People signing. 70,000 people signed this. And that's what it looks like today. It's gone. And there's their plaque, and I have what it says. It says, we invited the citizens of Hamburg and visitors to our city to add their names here to ours. In doing so, we commit ourselves to remain vigilant. As more and more names cover this column, it will be gradually lowered into the ground. One day, it will have disappeared completely. And the site of this monument against fascism will be empty. In the end, then, it is only we ourselves who can remember that we have to rise up against injustice. I think that's powerful. A big struggle, and the struggle of coming to the terms of the past in Germany, right, that big word I gave you at the beginning, is Germany did not have a national memorial to the Holocaust. How does the government that carried out the systematic murder of 6 million innocent civilians memorialize that? No one really knew. In 1995, a competition began, a global competition for artists. You could do a proposal. One person wrote in. Do you know what this is? Everyone ever been to Berlin? This is the Brandenburg Gate. It's in the middle of Berlin. This is a symbol of Germany. One of the proposals was we should blow that up. Let's blow it up, we'll dynamite it, then we'll pave over the site with its dust. Because what better way to memorialize the murder carried out by this government than to destroy the symbol of the government? Do you think the German government agreed to pay for this? Of course not. Right? And so they canceled the competition. They didn't know what to do. They reopened it a few years. There are other really interesting entries. One is, if you go to Germany, there's the famous Autobahn system. It's the interstate, right? And there's often no speed limit. One of the entries said, every 10 miles or so, let's tear up half a mile of the Autobahn and pave it over with cobblestones. So that no matter what, you have to slow down from 100 miles an hour to 10 miles an hour. It's the everydayness, right? You will always remember. Of course, the German government did not sign up for this either. What was finally chosen in 2005 was this. It opened in 2005. It's called the Memorial to the Murdered Jews of Europe, in both German and English. Do you notice anything strange about that name? The word Holocaust doesn't appear. The German government's gotten criticized for that. It's also sort of a passive construction, right? The Jews were murdered, but we aren't going to really put agency. The site looks like this from the air. This is downtown Berlin. The fanciest hotel in the whole city, the one where Obama stays, for example, when he visits, is next door to here. This is next to that Brandenburg Gate, next to the parliament. This is also the site where some Nazi government buildings were, right? So it's interesting in that way. It looks like this from the ground. These granite blocks, there are about 2,000 of them, are supposed to represent coffins. And you're in the middle of one of the biggest cities in Europe, downtown, and you wander in. And it gets really, really quiet, and it gets dark, because the ground goes down, and those columns get higher and higher. And before you know it, you're in the middle of a major city, in the middle of the city that coordinated the Holocaust, and it's silent and kind of dark. And over 1 million Jewish victims of the Holocaust were shot in the forests. This is like a forest. It's dark and it's quiet. This is an incredibly powerful memorial, in my mind. These stones change depending on the time of day, but this has been incredibly complicated. Skateboarding is a big part of Berlin culture among youth. Those coffin things are just the right size to skateboard on. This is open 24 hours a day. There are no signs, really. Anyone can wander in. That's part of the point. It's this everydayness. Right? And you can wander in the evening. People are making out, smoking marijuana on top, having picnics. Right? And you can probably see this coming. This has also become a site for selfies. Right? A few years back, I teach in San Antonio. One of the San Antonio Spurs was in the news because he did a selfie here. Right? He took it down. Right? But earlier, I just went on my phone on Instagram and checked in here to this memorial to the murdered Jews of Europe to see some recent pictures. There's that. Baby, watch me from the sideline while I rock this life. Right? That. Right. And so it's complicated, at best. It's made even more complicated by, during the construction of this thing, this memorial, street art is a big part of German and Berlin culture in particular, right? Graffiti. And so the government said, we need to cover these stones with an anti-graffiti chemical, right? So if someone wrote something, we could just wipe it off. And so this happened. They hire a company called Degussa to do this. And it just so happened that Degussa had been part of a larger German chemical conglomerate that was broken up after the war called IG Farben. And one of those companies very famously made this. Gift gas. Gift is a false cognate in German. Gift in German is poison. Poison gas. And so they had to figure out what to do then. And it was decided that we've already started this project, right? If we find another supplier, it's going to cost millions of euros, right? And so they proceeded. So complicated. To the everydayness. Now we're going to go to my iPhone pictures. I apologize. But I go to work sometimes. There's an archive in Koblenz in Western Germany that I use for my research. And in the main central train station of Koblenz, as you're getting your coffee and your muffin in the morning, there's that scrolling marquee. And 24 hours a day, it says, from this site, the so-called Third Reich deported Jews, Jehovah's Witnesses, gypsies, homosexuals to be deported to the east to be murdered. You see that every morning as you're getting coffee, going to work. I think that's powerful in my mind. Notice the language there, though. The so-called Third Reich. We're a totally different government, a different state, right, than that, right? So there's separation there. Another, I think, useful style of memorialization, perhaps for us, is something called Stolpersteine, stumbling stones. You might have seen these if you've been to Europe. This is where I'll end. This is now the world's largest memorial. It was started in 1992 by a German artist as part of a program. And how it works is anyone in the world, if you have 120 euros, you mail it to this foundation, or you submit it online. And so in Germany, what often looks like, these are fundraisers for elementary school classes. So the class raises 120 euros, and this foundation, headed by this artist, goes out to the last known residents of a victim of the Holocaust. And virtually all the sidewalks in Germany are these cobblestones. A cobblestone is removed, and a bronze block is put in. And it says, here lived name, born date, deported date, murdered. The word murdered is always used in Auschwitz. There are 60,000 of these now across more than 20 countries in Europe. And so, especially if you're in a city, right, as you're going to do your shopping in the morning or whatever, the idea is you stumble across these. You can't help but notice them. I'll leave you with a quote from the most famous German poet, Goethe. He said, "Everything is simpler than we think, but at the same time much more complex and intertwined and complicated than we can possibly imagine." And I think this memorialization process exemplifies that. It's been contested, has multiple meetings here, right? It's been incredibly complicated, right? And I think that as we try to move forward, that's going to be the case for us. So, thank you.